The Many Saints of Newark was directed by Alan Taylor and is a prequel movie to The Sopranos. This movie was also written by David Chase, who is the creator of the show, and Alan Taylor even directed a few episodes. And this movie tells the story of Dickie Moltisanti, played by Alessandro Nivola, and his rise into the mafia, and how he influenced a lot of characters that we've come to know in the show ever since then, especially a young Tony Soprano, played by Michael Gandolfini, and how his character eventually took on certain things and certain character traits that made him the person that we got to know in the show. Right there's an emotional connect because, as you all know, James Gandolfini, who played Tony Soprano in the show, he passed away some years ago, and it was an incredibly tragic piece of news to hear. And when that happened, of course, it tore a hole through everybody's hearts, especially fans of The Sopranos. And so hearing that his son was playing a younger version of him in this movie, immediately you knew that there was going to be a bit of a gut punch just watching that. And that you definitely get, but I'll talk more about that later. But I should preface by also saying that this is not a movie about Tony Soprano. He's in it. But this is really about Dickie Moltisanti. So if you see the tagline on the poster, "Who Made Tony Soprano?" you think that's what it's really about. It's not. Tony's in it. And so are Silvio Dante and Paulie Walnuts and all of those other characters. But this is really about Dickie. And the film very much focuses on him, which is a great centerpiece for Alessandro Nivola, who I think is a really great and criminally underrated actor, and he gets a really, really good hand dealt here. In fact, I think this is easily his best performance. He's excellent in the film and directed really, really well. And this film is really great, especially if you're a Sopranos fan. It is chock full of references to the show. There's a lot of Easter eggs in there, certain lines of dialogue that you'll hear and go, "Ha-ha!" There's one dialogue in particular which made me actually start yelling, "Yes!" So I rarely do that. And if you were watching the show and thought certain things were left unanswered, there's a couple of things that happen in this movie that kind of create a bridge. There's a moment in particular that I thought, okay, that answers that little question. There's even a moment in this which they recreated from the show that I think from season 1 or 2, and there's a moment with young Tony that's in this movie that I was actually surprised about. I was kind of amazed they created it. In fact, they extend it forward because they stop it at one point and then the scene goes on in this movie. So I thought that was really, really cool. I think the movie is definitely going to do that for a lot of people, especially, like I said, if you have seen The Sopranos before. But let's say you've never seen The Sopranos before and are going into this. Is it something that is going to ruin your experience? Absolutely not. I think it's a film that you can still enjoy on its own regard quite a bit. I think there are a lot of things that will actually make you want to see the show later on. I think there are certain things that you will benefit from, having seen the show before. Like there's a couple of things that, how do I put this? They set up something that happens later on, and so it's like it can act like a spoiler for that, season. For instance, I think that's the best way to say it without spoiling anything over here. But it's not necessarily like, breaking the show or anything like that. You can still see the show in its own regard. So definitely do that. So let's talk about Michael Gandolfini. Okay, this was tough. It was very emotional seeing him take on this role, especially since he's talked about how he used to see his dad in the show and used to try and shadow him pretty often, but his dad didn't want him to be an actor, but he still used to see him do the role and, try and walk in those footsteps every now and then as a kid. And then, of course, when he passed away and the idea of taking this role on, it not only is just like, like a tribute to his late father, but it is definitely emotional to see. And he very much learned because there are moments where he's absolutely 100% channeling his dad. And it's remarkable to see. And he does a really, really good job. There's a scene with him in particular where I was like, yep, that's Tony. That really is him. It's not just the uncanny resemblance that he has to his dad. He does a really good job. I also want to give a big shout out to Vera Farmiga, who plays Livia Soprano, because that is a really, really tough role to play, especially when you see the show. Like, trying to recreate that performance is next to impossible. And the fact that Farmiga comes as close as she can, in fact, even nailing the voice in a couple of moments, like, she does it pretty well throughout the entire film. There's a couple of moments which are like even more so than most that I really thought were incredible. Really, everybody did a really good job in this movie. As with The Sopranos, there's no musical score or sweeping thing going around it. There's a lot of music in it, but it's used in a very good way. There's one thing in particular that'll get people very, very excited. They use a certain musical piece that was really cool. But there's a lot more deliberate pacing to it, so there's not a lot of exciting, tense music that's playing throughout it. I want to address that because if you saw the trailers, they sort of sold it as a hyper stylized mafia movie. It's not a hyper stylized mafia movie. This is a much more grounded movie that very much in tone with The Sopranos itself. In fact, in tonally speaking, and not just that, and even in terms of pacing, it felt like an extended episode of probably like one of the seasons from it, which I think is good because I think you cannot do hyper stylized action with The Sopranos. It's not like, fucking Gangster Squad or something like that. Like, you gotta take your time when you're telling a story like this, and the fact that this movie does that, it really speaks to the fact that Chase hasn't lost his touch when it comes to the show and the world that he's created, and all those years ago to now. And I really have to give props to that. Although I will say one issue with it is that I feel like it could have benefited from maybe getting a limited series run, because there were moments in it where I felt like there was potential for something to be a whole episode in itself. Like something would come up, I said, oh, that's interesting, I wonder how much time will be spent on that. And unfortunately, because it's a movie and it has those constraints of being 2 hours long only, sometimes I feel like certain things are only shown briefly, but they don't really go into it as much as they want to. And I feel like that is maybe my only flaw with it. Some people have talked about how it leaves you wanting more, and of course there is the show for that, but I think in terms of this movie, especially when it's telling Dickie Moltisanti's story, there are so many things that come up, but they sort of move on to the next thing because they got to keep it moving, that sometimes it can feel like, it can just feel a little bit underdone. But I don't necessarily know who, to blame for that. I don't blame anybody per se. That's just unfortunate that it had to be in this movie. It's surprisingly cinematic, actually, for a movie that's based on this television show. Nothing about it feels like, it's like made for TV or something like that. It feels like it has that grand scale, despite the fact that, like I said, it does feel like one of those, an episode from the show, but an extended version of that. But that is a testament to the fact that Chase and Taylor understood that medium, and they've done a really good job of adapting it to the big screen. In fact, speaking of Taylor, this might be my favorite movie of his from all that I've seen. I think he's done a really, really good job here. And I think this film, like I said, will please a lot of fans of The Sopranos. And if you're someone who has never seen The Sopranos, I hope it gets you to watch the show. I'm going to give The Many Saints of Newark an 8 out of 10. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Have you guys seen The Many Saints of Newark? What do you think about it? Or have you seen The Sopranos? What are your thoughts on the show? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies.